Well, good afternoon, Malabar. A very warm welcome to Azura. We do have a wonderful celebrity guest speakers on board here with us. And these two are a lovely couple, and they are going to tell you a beautiful story in great depths of saving the tiger of India. So please welcome Cherrie and Geoffrey Whittle. You confused me a little bit just now, so please give them a big round of applause.
Thank you. That's all right. Thanks, Emma. We've obviously made a big impression to start with. So thank you. And thank you, all of you, for coming and turning up, sort of luring you away from the sun now that it's finally come out. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, we're going to be explaining various aspects of tiger conservation to you and our journey in our time in India. But to kick it off, we thought we'd actually just give you a bit of background into what actually took us and our family out to India in the first place. So this is a bit more of the human element rather than the animal, and we'll see various aspects of it as we go through, but those will be in greater detail in other talks. So to start with, what actually took us to India? Well, my brother turned up on the doorstep one day, and he'd been studying tiger since he was born, and said that he had to get out to India and live there because there was no other way that he was actually going to do something towards preserving the tiger. Cherrie and I didn't have any experience of tiger, but we were looking for a change in our lifestyle. We felt that we had a sort of a background in what my brother was thinking was going to be the way that he did things, and that was that he was going to set up an eco-tourist lodge so that the funding from the tourist lodge paid for the conservation work in India. So Cherrie and I, my background was running an advertising agency. Cherrie used to fly with British Airways in the days when they had canvas on the wings, so we thought we had some time and some experience there to actually run the eco-tourist bit. So we said, well, look, we'll do the eco-tourist lodge, you do the scientific tiger bit. So that was the agreement.
So the first thing we had to do was sell our house and sell everything. So we had a garage sale, told the children that we were off to India. Our eldest son said to us, hey, we'll do our gap year when we want to do our gap year, not when you decide to do it. But they decided to come with us anyway. And
so, as I say, our business, the advertising agency, was going through its peaks and troughs, as do most businesses throughout the course of their lives. Ours was in a particular trough, which had given us the impetus to think of actually doing something different. Otherwise, we were sort of a normal family with the usual trials and tribulations of bringing up young kids, and our kids were 9 and 11 years old at that stage, so I was still in the process of telling my son to get his hair cut because he looked like a girl, and it was all the usual sort of hassle that you would have with a family. I did get my own back with my eldest son because no sooner had we got to Delhi than a rickshaw driver pinched his bottom, so he decided he really did want to look like a boy after all. Needless to say, we sold the boys the dream, and it was going to be an eco-tourist lodge, a jungle lodge in the central areas of Tiger India, if you like, where we would be working and acting as the hosts for various visitors to come and see the work that was being done.
Not only did Geoff manage to sell the dream to the boys, he managed to sell it to me as well. So when I packed the trunk, I put in my cocktail dress, my tennis racket, and I imagined that we would be in beautiful India, sipping gin and tonics on the veranda. And I thought, well, yeah, that's not a bad life we could lead.
And the boys went with this sort of notion that they'd have their own elephants and that life would be grand when we got out to India. So what was it that turned it from that dream into this rather glum, miserable-looking bunch sitting in the middle of a jungle, looking anything but living the dream? Well, it all started in Indira Gandhi Airport in Delhi, each of us standing there looking rather forlorn, holding one suitcase each, which was all that was left of our worldly goods, everything else having been sold, as Cherrie said, and sort of burnt our bridges behind us.
We'd got nothing planned. I mean, it was just impossible to try and plan to know where we were going to live. So the first thing I did was we were settled down. The boys said, we'll wait here at the airport. Geoff, you go off. Find us a room, find us somewhere to stay, find us somewhere nice. This is going to be for the next 3 to 4 months that we're going to live here. So off he toddled us.
So given that the only money we had from selling our house and selling everything we possessed, we had no income. This was going to be the money that we were going to survive on for the indefinite future. So I thought, well, there's no good being lavish with the hotel. We'll go into the Pachmarhi area, main bazaar, we'll get something that we can live in where we're not worrying about the rupees going out too quickly. So I found this nice little hotel, medical facility quite close by, telecommunications on hand, not far away at all, so we're right in the hub of everything. Hot and cold running water here. This is a chai stall here, making cups of tea, the Indian tea, and this is the public urinal next door to it.
And this was also the entrance to our hotel. And with the heat and the sanitation not being very good, the smell along that alleyway was just appalling. So the boys and I had to remind each other every time, just a few minutes outside, holding our nose and going as fast as we possibly could up this lane, otherwise we'd all feel so sick.
Early morning breakfast was a mix of lassi and chapatis and fairly basic food.
Our youngest son, unfortunately, didn't like curries. I mean, you know, can you really blame him? Curry for breakfast, curry for lunch, curry for dinner. He didn't like anything of that. Didn't mind yogurt. Didn't mind the chapatis, which is just a flat bread. So he ate chapati and bread, the chapati and yogurt, the whole way round. Now, when we first got to Delhi, he bought a belt, and he was quite a big lad, and he had to have an extra hole put on the length of it so that it could fit round. By the time we left India, he actually had to have another hole, but it was at the other end because he'd lost so much weight. But he was better looking for that stage.
I did keep warning everybody that it could be far worse than the accommodation we were living in, and Paharganj being the poor area of Delhi. You see some very sort of basic sights, and it rather puts into perspective the fact that although we were feeling sorry for ourselves, there were always people that were far worse off. The hotel, there was constant building going on around within the bazaar area.
We were trying to tell our boys we were responsible. You know, we were responsible adults and we would take care of them. Within the first week while we were staying in Delhi, there was one murder, one hotel falling down, and what was the other thing? I can't remember.
But there was an explosion.
An explosion, a bomb went off in one of the hotels. So we were struggling at that stage. We were saying, guys, you know, this is going to be all right.
And you can see this is all pretty basic. This is just bamboo. Health and safety is not a major issue in India. We also realised, I mean, the time that we were spending in Delhi was predominantly because we were dealing with Project Tiger offices, which are based in Delhi, and what we were trying to do was to identify the particular park that we wanted to go to, which was going to be the least affected by tourism and commercial pressure, and that we were going to be able to show the greatest achievement, if you like, in terms of having an impact on tiger conservation. So we were forced to spend a bit of time in Delhi. It had been impossible to find any information in the UK dealing with the Indian High Commission. It's all too remote, which was why we'd actually ended up in India in the first place. We did recognise after a while, though, that Delhi wasn't going to be much help to us, and we were going to have to start exploring for ourselves. Also, schooling was non-existent. Our lads wouldn't have even fitted into the school bus, let alone got to the school. So the next part of the journey was to pack up our cases again and head off to the railway station. And this was the start of a year's travel around India, literally living out of suitcases, moving from jungle to jungle, around different areas and different parks, mainly by train.
The very first journey we did was 8 hours, and we thought, oh my God, what are we going to do for 8 hours? So we had the cards and the games for the lads, and 8 hours was a long time. But that was one of the shortest journeys we did. In the end, we were travelling often 36 hours, and we used to sleep on the trains, and we got very used to sharing cabins with some very unsavoury characters. But, you know, we did learn to travel fine.
Yeah, if you ever want to see life in India and to share life in India, travelling by train is one of the best. But we also travelled by all sorts of other means of transport, fairly rickety old tempos, which were literally felt like packing cases welded together.
Geoff got very used to bargaining and bartering with the taxi drivers. But what he used to forget was that 25 rupees was, 30 pence. And so he'd be bartering for about 5 rupees and make us walk because he insisted on not paying that extra 5 rupees.
Well, it was a finite amount of money again that we had. I was very conscious of that. And it was at this stage, as we were travelling off along the roads, that my brother said, look, I'm sorry, fellas, and I know that we've all sort of packed up our lives and headed to India, but the climate doesn't suit me and the food really doesn't suit me. I don't think I can hang in here any longer. I think I'm going to have to go back to the UK. So we thought, oh, well, that's a bit of a blow, seeing that we don't really know a great deal about tigers. So we actually came to an accommodation, and we set up at this stage a UK-registered charity which would actually start to vector funds through from the UK into the projects that we eventually would set up. So my brother, knowing absolutely nothing about advertising and marketing, went back to market the charity in the UK, and Cherrie and I started on a very long and ultimately rewarding process of learning all about tigers and tiger conservation. And this was the turning point, really. These roads, incidentally, this is a major state highway. So this is the equivalent of the M1 or the M6 or whatever in India. And it's barely wide enough for two vehicles to pass. And in order for them to pass, they head off either side onto what's called murram at the side, which is compacted earth, which is fine in the summer, but in the monsoons turns into a roller coaster of mud. So you can imagine once it's dried out again, that if you hit this at any speed on the side, you're literally catapulted into the air. Fantastic scenery, superb country, but it gives you an idea of what it's like to travel around it. You could never ever travel more than 50 miles an hour on these roads, and these were frequent sights. The coaches sometimes that we travelled on, because we had no transport of our own at this stage, would be so rickety with the people sitting on top with all their baggage that as the vehicle braked or accelerated, so the whole roof would shift forwards or backwards. So you felt rather vulnerable sitting inside these things.
When we did finally get a vehicle, one of the things that we were told was actually never to stop at an accident, because unfortunately, although we were never under threat or any problems in India, when something like that happens, everybody becomes very volatile. So anybody around that is a stranger or somebody driving a vehicle, they will actually, they can become rather vindictive, and there have been times when people have been pulled out of a bus and beaten badly because of accidents and things like that.
But generally our travel around the country did have some lighter moments. Here the lads were having a buzz around in a rickshaw. We actually, I take quite a lot of photographs, as you'll probably come to realise by the end of this cruise. I never actually really have managed to get the kids or Cherrie to smile in any of these, but we did actually eventually enjoy ourselves while we were out there. Not that you would recognise that from this.
But at this stage, we were actually trying to home tutor our children. So we used to give them projects and ask them to find out information. So if we went to a place, or like here at Fatehpur Sikri, we would ask them to try and write us a story, paint us a picture, or give us some information, so that we were trying to help them and trying to teach them as we were going along.
And this Fatehpur Sikri was a fascinating city that was built as an alternative for Akbar to Agra as the centre of his capital, the Muslim capital. Within a year of Fatehpur Sikri having been built, it was abandoned because the water supply became saline. So this is perfectly preserved as a city, never really having been used or utilised for its true purpose, and it remains today in this condition. In our search for the correct or the most appropriate jungle to be working within, we travelled the length and breadth of India, and as I say, it took us the best part of a year before we actually found a place. This is up in the far northeast in Meghalaya, which is really quite a remote state. We were travelling around, we found a place that looked quite suitable in terms of jungle, but it put us off because it was predominantly smothered by cerebral malaria carrying mosquitoes. And we asked the little chap there when was the last time he saw a tourist, and he said, oh, we quite often see them. Mr. Harry was here 4 years ago on a bicycle. So we thought, well, probably not the best place to start an eco-tourist lodge.
Well, and also the other thing is that when you actually do go abroad, you don't go somewhere where it's going to be raining. And unfortunately, it was actually close by Cherrapunji, which is one of the wettest places on this earth. So we decided perhaps that wasn't the right place to set up a tourist lodge.
Yeah, and this is the normal sort of living conditions of the tribal people in Meghalaya. We also went up into Assam, and this is where the few remaining rhino are in India. And again, we were slightly discouraged from this. It's the first time the Earth's moved for me as well as for Cherrie when we had there was a minor earthquake while we were up there. So not to say that we were chicken about the places that we were going, but in actual fact there was a lot of insurgent problem here from Naxalites where they were actually killing off the forest guards, and heavy poaching was going on here. So it was unrealistic for us to expect to actually set up any controlled circumstances in terms of monitoring tiger. So we headed off into rural India, and as any of you have travelled to India will already know, many and diverse forms of transport, varying from Shanks's pony up through to the bullock carts and the trucks and the coaches. This sort of sign gives you some idea of the huge distances that one can travel within India, over 2,000 kilometres from where we happened to be standing at that time to Kanyakumari in the south. So quite arduous travelling, but nonetheless completely diverse and interesting landscape that we were going through. So Meghalaya, where I was talking about earlier, is up here in the northeast beyond Bangladesh. We'd also gone up into the north to Dehradun and Corbett Park, up around there, which was the first park that was actually ever set up as Project Tiger. We'd been down to the south, to Periyar. We'd been practically everywhere during that year. And the one place we hadn't been, because somebody had said, you don't want to go to Madhya Pradesh, because it's the oven of India, and you'll never survive it there. It's just ridiculous for a Westerner to consider living in the centre of India. But in actual fact, that is known as the Tiger State.
And it was
India.
during one time when we were in Delhi, we met a lady called Arundhati Roy, and I don't know whether anybody's read the book A God of Small Things. And they actually have a place in Madhya Pradesh, and they said that they felt that if there was any work to be done and in a place that we would actually enjoy, they thought that Pachmarhi was a place that we went. So that's in fact where we ended up heading.
So the closest reference point for Pachmarhi and Satpura, where we ended up, is Bhopal. Now that's got a rather checkered history, as I'm sure some of you will remember, with the Union Carbide accident that was there. So again, it was another reason why we were thinking, well, we're really not sure we want to be in that part of the world, because a lot of the pollution that happened as a result of that is still affecting the groundwater of Bhopal, and people are still ill or falling ill as a result of it today. Nevertheless, 250 kilometres to the southeast is this area.
It used to take us 5 hours to drive.
Yeah, it's a 5-hour journey, even though it's, 200 miles, something like that. The Tawa Reservoir here bounds the park on the northern and the western side, and this is Pachmarhi is a plateau of about 15 square kilometres, surrounded by 1,000 square kilometres of jungle. The actual park itself shows in more detail here with the reservoir. This is the little plateau on which we eventually lived, and this is the jungle which surrounded it, which was prime tiger territory and absolutely nothing in the way of impact from tourism or commercial pressure. The plateau had been preserved as a result of it originally being part of an old Raj Hill station and being run by the British Army. And when the British were finally kicked out of India in 1947, the Indian Army took it over and preserved it in the same way that the British had. And they'd actually stopped any significant development, because within India, because there are relatively few controls and a lot of backhanders that go on, concrete has sprung up everywhere. But on this particular plateau, it's very much as though the English had just walked away from it. And what you're actually looking at here is the old golf course. It was a bit bare, and the greens weren't that wonderful any longer.
Well, they were
but
brown,
nevertheless,
weren't they?
yeah, they were browns. They call them browns now. They're just actually areas of sand, which is the way that they preserve the golf course today. But nevertheless, we were surrounded by this sort of scenery, this sort of jungle. We were in probably the most remote part of India. People in the jungle hadn't seen white people before, so we were quite a rarity. And although we were never ever made to feel unwelcome, we certainly know the other hand of what being the minority nationality is in a country.
And certainly in these sort of areas, whether you could only have access into the park for a short time over the summer, because during it wasn't summer, it was post-monsoon time, really, because when the monsoons came, all these roads would get wiped out. Boulders, everything. You just could not get in.
These are the tracks around the hillside.
And so you would have to wait after the monsoons at least a couple of months, unless we walked in, before you could actually have access into the park itself. So it was a very isolated area. And there were certain times when we would be the only vehicle in the park.
And by this time, we'd actually acquired an old wreck of a Jeep ourselves, so we were now self-sufficient. We were able actually to talk to the Forest Department and talk about the ways in which we could help them and start to develop the Tiger project that we had in mind.
So we found this house. Now, I mean, it looks very nice, but I can assure you it was sort of very dilapidated, and we've managed to make it our home. We had leaky roofs. We used to have strategic buckets places. We did actually have a shower, but we never had any hot water. But actually, in the summer, you didn't really need it. But we did make this our home.
And this was a building that was put up by the British. It's an old Raj bungalow. It was put up as a sanctuary for officers' wives from the heat of the plains, so for rest and recuperation. And I'm sure you're aware of the old Raj practice of the whole of the administration moving from the plains in the summer up onto the hill stations, and this was one such hill station. Cherrie, I gave her a split-level grill. This was our cooking facility, so she was well away there. Had all the mod cons that she hadn't had while we'd been travelling around for the year we were there. The boys would muck in and help occasionally. I tended to steer clear of things like that. They got even more burnt than they did normally if I got any hand in it. And the local electrics, always a sight for sore eyes. Some of these fuses had no wire in them but a 6-inch nail across the terminals to make certain that they didn't actually pack up on us. So this was our electrician. He would only come around when the power was on. We had power for 2 hours a day. He couldn't come round when the power was off because he didn't know if it was working or not anyway when he'd done the repair. So he would come round in his plastic shoes and deal with live wires standing in his plastic shoes. The only time I ever gripped hold of a wire, it gave me a severe shock. So I'm not quite sure how he'd ever become immune to that. If it was a more serious problem, you'd go to the local substation and you'd say, Bijli nahi, no power, got a problem. So a little guy would turn up on his bicycle with his little bag of tools. He'd pull a pair of pliers out of the tool bag, stuff them down the back of his collar, shin his way up the pipe to get to the top, get the pliers out, twiddle with the insulators, lights would come back on, he'd slide back to the bottom, pedal off again. Again, health and safety, forget it. This was our landlord. Always a man for schemes, this. Always had a project on the go. Always thought we were a soft touch. This was one of his latest chai stall ideas, and the idea was that you could wash your hands here, main problem being no water, no tap, no drain. But never mind.
He had a very strict wife. She was obviously the one that wore the trousers in the house. So he would come and knock on the door and he'd want to ask Geoff for something, probably money. And he would never ask him in front of me because he knew women, would not give him any money at all. And as at that time, we really had very little to live on ourselves. We were paying for the boys to go to a private school, so that was costing us a lot of money. And what we were actually trying to do eventually was to set up the rooms so that we could actually take guests. So him coming and asking us for money was rather ridiculous. But anyway, he always had some sort of scheme going on.
We hadn't actually got round to sending the kids away at that stage,
but
we knew we had to do something.
At some stage,
we'll get to that. We'll get to that bit in the story in a minute, but not worry. Get back to something you know.
Oh, well, at least I had a washing machine. And we used to send all our stuff to get right. But my son said to me one time, why don't you buy an iron? And I said, look, the one thing out in India is that I don't mind paying 1 penny per garment to be washed and ironed. That I can cope with. And these ladies used to take them off and wash them. They used to come back a little bit worse for wear because they would be dried either on the grass or on the wire fences. So they would end up either, a little bit torn or a little bit rusty or smelling of wood smoke where they dried them in their huts. But hey-ho.
And then off down to the bazaar. Obviously, the only sort of food you can get, no supermarkets, very, very rudimentary, very basic supplies. You could only ever had what was seasonal. I mean, let's to be fair, that's what it used to be in the UK. But things have moved on somewhat. But it's nice to see that you could, well, for me it was, that you could actually get the freshest
I mean,
of vegetables.
the vegetables were beautifully fresh. You could choose, you walk along. You knew they'd just literally been picked that day. You know, they travelled probably 10 kilometres or something. They might have come up from the plains. So they put them on a bus, come up the hill. And we would be going along, and we learnt how to, the boys would speak a little bit of Hindi, and we'd all sort of pick and choose what we wanted. We did actually have some meat, a meat market, but really we lived on vegetables, but they were beautiful vegetables.
I think this is Ollie here saying, oh no, not curry again. Various trades and really interesting environment, the Indian markets. This one in particular, gypsies have actually come into this market area. They're actually manufacturing axe heads and woodsman's axes. No self-respecting tribal will ever be seen without an axe in the jungle, either to chop wood and whip it out illicitly, or to protect himself from the wild animals which he's sharing his environment with. Interesting here is the women wielding the heavy sledgehammer while the man stands by and does
That's
the technical
why Geoff
bit.
liked it so much in India.
Yeah, I really assimilated this quite well, this sort of lifestyle. This is one of the local guys coming around, the honey waller, bringing locally caught honey to our doorstep.
It was really lovely, but it did go rather strange colour after a month, so I'm not quite sure just how pure the honey was, but we didn't die.
Another old Raj bungalow converted into a post office, or this was the post office on the hill station. The stamps there, you would go and say, I'd like a 20 rupee stamp or a 30 rupee stamp to send a letter back to India, and they'd say, oh, dreadfully sorry, no 30 rupee stamps, and they'd give us about 40 quarter-cent rupee stamps to put on there, and a gum pot because they weren't self-adhesive. So by the time you'd finished sticking those on, around the address and all over the back of it, because there was just barely enough room to get the things on there, you were completely and utterly smothered in glue, and it was difficult to then part with the envelope that you wanted to send.
This dog was... he adopted us. So he just came from nowhere one day. We were walking along, and he just started walking along beside us. He never asked for food. He never wanted for anything, but he just liked to be with us. And I believe that if, as we were in India, you've got to believe in reincarnation. And this guy must have been an old British officer come back to look after us.
Well, he did a fine job. Quick shave and a haircut. 20 rupees, so about 15 pence, something like that, 18 pence. Now, I know it doesn't look as though I need much of a haircut these days, but I did at that time. And we'd actually left, went out to India in 96, we didn't get back till 2003. And in that time, I think we all aged significantly. But nevertheless, you could live on a shoestring, and that suited us while we were trying to establish the project.
You never found a ladies' hairdressers, it was only ever men's hairdressers that you found. And this is me trying to teach the boys how to do their homework. Well, I used to have to do my homework the night before, and I was really struggling with it, I have to say. And the boys they needed some company of their own age. So we decided that despite the fact that we'd always promised ourselves that we'd keep the boys with us, we decided that it was time that they needed to have a proper education, otherwise they'd get too far behind. So much to our... dismay, we had actually decided to send them off to school, and they had to go down to South India, which was 3 days' journey away. By car, by train, by bus, and so I think you've gone a little bit fast.
No, well, I think.
Oh, right. Have you done with that?
Yeah, I'm done with that one. Yeah, it's not talking about us; it's talking about the kids. But yes, I mean, it was a big wrench to actually have the kids leave us. A real problem. It left Cherrie and myself very much on our own. The boys had gone down to the extreme south. It was the only UK curriculum residential school in the whole of Asia, so we were rather short on choices. It left us, though, with much more time to actually spend with the forest department, and it was at this stage that we started to get a real knowledge of the local area, not only in terms of the tribal people that live there, but also of the wildlife. It was really, really isolated existence.
The tribal people, they are two different tribes. There's one, the Gons, one's the Korkus. And actually, we're going to do a talk later on specifically about the tribal people, who we actually got to know very well